Hello and welcome to another edition of Cooking with Your Coaches. My name is Courtney Handel and I'm one of the health coaches at the Waukesha Employee Health and Wellness Center, and thank you for joining me today. Today we're making granola. I'm going to make it really easy, help you to understand how making your own granola, how that all works so that you can take any recipe and adapt it, or it can even work on the fly without a recipe. And the reasons for making your own, one, obviously it's going to be probably healthier because you're adding less sugar than what's in the store, less preservatives. You're going to save money. A lot of the ingredients are things that you likely already have at home. And also because we're not purchasing at the store the granola, that package, so there's less plastic waste because we're just storing it in things that we have at our house. And maybe one of my favorites, outside of the less added sugar and it's healthier, is that you have the freedom to personalize it. There's just so many varieties of granola out there. And sometimes when I go to the store, I get this way with trail mix too. Maybe there's something in there that I don't really want, or I wish it had something else. So here you can do that. Also, the fun with personalizing, like granola or trail mix, there's just so a wide variety of things you can do. Here, when you're making it yourself, you could do smaller batches and you could, play around with some of those different recipe ideas and really have fun with it. And so that you're not, using up this giant thing and waiting and you get sick of it by the end. So lots of room for personalization here. So let's discuss a little bit some of the basics of how granola works. Of course, we need oats. That's a really good base. It's high fiber, and so I'm using just old-fashioned rolled oats. That's pretty common base to have for your granola recipe. Nuts and seeds are also good. They're full of healthy fats, adding some protein as well. And so I've got a list of, some different nuts there. And when you think of that, you want to have about 1 part nut to 5 part oats. So that might be, if you're having 5 cups of oatmeal, then you probably would have about 1 cup of nuts. Obviously, there's some room to add more or less depending on what you have available, especially if you have to use things up. And so I'll talk about that a little bit today. What I did to adapt to that kind of philosophy, I guess, of making my own granola and make it work for what I had available at my house. Oil, you're going to want about 4 tablespoons of oil for 6 to 7 cups of granola. And so if you're looking at, think about 5 cups of oats plus about 1 cup of nuts, there's our 6 cups, right? And then 7 is for the 7th, the extra cup is for maybe the extra other things that you add. And you do want to have oil. Helps the granola get a nice crunch. Also, of course, is one of the binding ingredients that helps with that when you bake it. But the biggest thing is that crunch. And so we recommend an oil that is more neutral in flavor, so grapeseed oil or avocado oil. You could also use coconut oil, like melted coconut oil. But just keep in mind that that's going to raise the saturated fat content. So if that's of a concern, maybe going with a different oil. Of course, you could use olive oil, but that is, again, sometimes has a little bit more of a flavor to it. I guess it depends. Maybe if you're making a savory granola, that might be tasty. Let's see. The other thing to consider here is you could sub most or all the oil for like a peanut butter or some other type of nut butter. I'm not doing that today in the recipe, but I have made peanut butter granola before and it's delicious. But just know that is kind of where that would fit in if you're adding that. And then, of course, we want to talk about a sweetener and giving it some flavor. So that ratio is about a half cup for every 6 to 7 cups of granola. And you see there I have yum. Like that's what makes it kind of a more flavorful, right? And also helps with the binding. So pure maple syrup or honey are really good options. And then vanilla extract, obviously, or any kind of extract if you want that flavor. Thinking about spices that you might want, cinnamon, cardamom, nutmeg. I mean, you can really play with it. The list is, of course, endless there. Adding a little bit of salt always helps to make the flavors pop. And then another fun one, I haven't tried this yet, but adding fresh citrus zest. So that would be fun. I'm thinking especially if you're doing it maybe around the winter, if you're doing like one with dried cranberries, or some cinnamon and nutmeg, and you wanted to put like some fresh orange zest in there, I bet that would probably be really good. Or in the summer, I guess if you had some dried strawberries or dried peaches and you wanted to put a little lemon zest in there, that would be delicious as well. And then lastly, some flair. Thinking of flair. Again, this is optional. You don't have to add the flair. But that would be, if you are, it's about 1 part flair to 5 part oats. So it could be 1 cup to your 5 cups, etc. And that might be coconut strips, dried or dehydrated fruit, maybe some dark chocolate chips, or maybe even some cereal, like crispy, thinking like crispy, low or no sugar, like some Chex or plain Cheerios, something like that, if you like kind of that variety and texture. With the flair, I will just say with some of those, you need to be careful about when you add them. Cereal, obviously, you could add right away. Coconut strips would be good to add kind of midway through baking so that they get toasty, but not burnt. And then when we think about like the fruit and the chocolate chips, we might want to add those. I guess it depends if you want them stuck in there, but chocolate chips, you probably want to wait till it's cooled to add them, because otherwise it's just going to melt. So unless you're making like a chocolate granola, you probably don't want to add the chocolate chips until it's all done and cooled. Okay, so moving on to the recipe. So this is, like I said, just a basic recipe. It's one that I adapted. There's a blog, and then also from Eating Well. So I kind of combined a couple of recipes that I had liked and have used in the past, and essentially made my own based on what their recipes were. So this is what I am doing today with the recommended ingredients there. So if you are getting yourself ready, go ahead and hit pause on me, and you can just focus on that screen and get your stuff, your measuring cups and your bowls and mixing things, etc. And then when you're ready, you can hit play and make the recipe with me. But I am all set, so let's go ahead and get started. The first step is preheating your oven to 300, so go ahead and do that if you haven't already. And then you want to line a rimmed baking sheet with either parchment paper or just a silicone mat, and so that's ready. And then we get to the fun part. So in a large bowl, we've got our oats, and then we're just going to add all the dry ingredients. So today I've got my oats. I'm going to add some pecans that I've got in here. I've got about a cup of pecans today, and then I'm doing some seeds too. So I've got 1 cup of pecans, and then if you saw in there, the recipe said 1.5 cups of nuts and seeds. So I've got 1 cup of pecans, 1/4 cup of chia seeds, and 1/4 cup of flax seeds, whole flax seeds, to make total 1.5 cups that I'm putting in there. I like to add chia seeds and flax seeds because they give it extra protein and extra fiber, omega-3s, etc. So that's why I add those. I also like to add, and I'm just going to give this a quick little stir. You can see a beautiful melody in there. I also like to add, though, ground flaxseed. And the reason for that is, the flax seeds, the seeds give it a nice little crunch and create some texture, but to get the fiber and omega-3s from a flax seed, you actually have to break the kernel open with your teeth, which they're super, super tiny. Let's see if I can dig one out, but that's going to be difficult at this point. Okay. Alright, no, I can't dig one out. So they're like the size of a sesame seed, to give you a reference. So that would be, the chances of actually breaking that open with the teeth, probably pretty slim. So adding the ground flaxseed helps so that you can actually get more of that nutritional value, the purpose. So I'm adding that as well, just a sprinkle. I'd say that's probably about a tablespoon or so. Again, just to help give it more omega-3s, protein, fiber, etc. Okay, so that's all ready. I've got my dry stuff all in there. I'm going to go ahead and add my cinnamon And I think on here it said half a teaspoon of cinnamon. I doubled that and went for 2 teaspoons of cinnamon because that's the prime flavor I want to have in here. I really like cinnamony granola. And then just a little bit of sea salt, so I'm just going to grind a little bit in there. And if you don't have sea salt, if you just have regular salt, and this recipe, I think it had said a teaspoon of sea salt, so if you have just regular salt, just using a little bit less would be good. Okay, so we've got our dry stuff ready to go. Now all we do is just add the liquid. So we're adding in the oil, the either maple syrup or honey, and I will say it's whatever you want. Obviously, they both will bring their own flavor. I didn't want to use up the last of my pure maple syrup nor the last of my honey, so I did a 1/4 cup of each one to get me to the 1/2 cup of the honey or maple syrup. 6 tablespoons of oil, if you were wondering, and then 1 teaspoon vanilla. So let me go ahead and just pour those in here. Vanilla, and I'll get grapeseed oil, and then here's my syrup honey combination. Just make sure I get all that good stuff out. And then we just stir it. Make sure that it's all blended. Everything gets a touch of that sticky goodness. So very easy. This recipe is so easy. When I go to, like, when I'm in a pinch and I decide to buy granola at the store, I cringe a little bit inside because I know how easy it is to make, and that I have all the, most likely have all the ingredients at home. But sometimes life happens and you're busy and you just don't have the time to set aside to make the granola or to deal with the cooking, etc. This is also a really easy recipe to make with kids because, well, one thing that probably most people don't care about, but there's no over mixing that you have to worry about. So that's nice. They can just mix away. Obviously, it's easy sometimes to fly out and make a mess, so use a deeper bowl. But it's just a lot of like measuring and dumping, and there's no eggs, which is always helpful. There's nothing that you have to cut, and so it's a good way for them to practice measuring, stirring, pouring, etc. All right, so now that we've got that stirred in, everything seems to be pretty well coated. We're going to go ahead and just pour it onto our prepared pan. And let me get all those chia seeds out of the bottom here. Okay. And then we just spread it out so it's nice and flat, kind of a thin layer, or I guess as thin as you can get it, but kind of even so that it's cooking and baking evenly, and you don't have, some spots that there's not much there and they're crisping up really fast. Let me get this spread out here, and I'll give you a little preview. And since there's no raw eggs, you could even, just take a little bit and give it a try. That's pretty good. Might be helpful to do that before you put it on in case if you wanted to add anything extra. But at this point, it wouldn't hurt to do like an extra drizzle of honey or smattering of cinnamon, etc. if you had wanted to do that. Okay, so here is the pan. As you can see, everything's spread out flat, and next we are moving on. So now we're going to go into baking. So baking for this is low and slow is really the key. So like I said, I set my oven at 300 degrees, and you want to bake it until it's lightly golden. So it really can vary, but about 20 minutes, could be 26, could even be up to 30. We'll find out depending on your oven. And you want to stir halfway through. So usually I would set, okay, minimum is 20 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes, give it a stir, and then put it in for another 10, and then see where I'm at from there, how many additional minutes it needs to get that golden color. Also, like I said, if you are going to be adding coconut flakes or any other kind of thing halfway through, that'll help you to set that timer reminder too. So let me go ahead and get that in the oven. Okay, so now while that's going, this is a good time to, because you've got a while it's baking, so either get some dishes going, do some push-ups, do some squats, maybe catch up on your favorite Talk About Wellness podcast. But regardless, go ahead and feel free to put me on pause until you're ready to move on to the next step, which is cooling, and we can talk about that as soon as it's done baking. And just enjoy a little bit of time to yourself. I'll be right here once you're done and ready to move on. So once your granola is done baking to the goldenness that you like, obviously pull it out of the oven, and then you're going to want to let it cool completely. The suggestion is 45 minutes. I've even read someone say like cover it with a tea towel and cool it overnight. It's hard to wait that long, of course, but the cooling part is when it dries and it really starts to just stick together. So you're probably going to prefer that it stick together there and then you break it up, as opposed to just throwing it all into a jar or a container and then it cools in there and sticks and forms into the shape of that container. So that is really important. And then, like I mentioned before, it's probably better to save, especially chocolate chips. Don't add those in until the very end. Once it's cooled, go ahead and break it up to your desired texture. Leave it big chunks if you want, or make it smaller, a variety, whatever. And then you can store it in an airtight container for 2 to 4 weeks. You can also freeze it. So typically what I'll do is I'll grab a couple, big mason jars. And usually this recipe, I'll fill 2 of them. So one I'll fill and I'll just put it in my cupboard for use. Maybe I'll put some in a smaller container, a smaller mason jar to leave at work. And then I'll fill up the other one and put it, double seal it into a freezer bag, label it, of course, and then keep that in the freezer for once the one that I have in the pantry is gone. And it freezes really well. Just let it sit out at room temperature for a bit. I think most of the times when I've let it unthaw, I let it unthaw in the fridge overnight first, and then in that morning brought it out to room temperature, and that works just fine. But you can also just let it unthaw on the counter overnight, and it doesn't take very long to unthaw at all. So hopefully you enjoy that. Like I said, thank you for joining us today. There's a lot of other ways that you can engage with us. Make sure to check out the other videos we have on YouTube. Subscribe so that you don't miss as soon as we have something like this come up. Check out our podcast, Talk About Wellness, anywhere you get your podcast. We are going to be releasing an episode in August, I believe, where we'll be explaining how different ingredients work when you're cooking or baking, so that you can have an easier time substituting things or making up things on the fly, using what you have, and doing that with confidence. When you don't have everything that the recipe asks for, then you better know how to sub or what you need to be looking for instead. So check that out on our podcast. We also have a garden surplus workshop coming up in July. We have a Chops challenge coming up in August. The registration for that will be coming in mid-July. And then, of course, coaching, wellness coaching. We're meeting people telephonically, virtually, in the office, outside of the picnic tables, or going for a walk. Lots of options for you there. So hope to see you soon, and happy cooking.